Today's lesson is Tipping Trends, a Global Perspective. Hi, everybody. I'm Roger.
And I'm Mike.
And today we're going to be talking about tipping. Tipping is when you give a little extra money, especially when you're eating a meal in a restaurant. In some countries, I'm really happy that that is not done here in Taiwan. It's so great to go to a restaurant and have a meal, and you don't have to leave a tip. But if you're at a restaurant in Canada or the USA or other countries, you should know about their customs regarding tipping. You don't want to stiff your servers.
Exactly right. And it is one of those cultural things that changes as you travel. In some places, tips are expected, as in North America. In other places, tips might be appreciated but not expected. So if you do feel that the service is extra good, then you can leave them a little bit of money, that tip, and they might actually be quite surprised or quite thankful. Say, oh, wow, that's unusual. Like here in Taiwan, sometimes I'll give 10 or 20 extra dollars to a taxi driver, and they always seem surprised and thankful. Often it's just because I can't be bothered to get the change. My pocket is full of coins already. But if they drive very well, very safely, have a particularly clean taxi, I might give them a tip, and they always seem very surprised and thankful for that. But then in other places, as we'll learn, tipping could actually insult people. So you definitely wouldn't want to tip in those countries. You wouldn't want to accidentally insult a person that you've never met, that person working at the restaurant who just helped you enjoy a great meal. You give them a bit of extra money and they're like, why did you do this? Why are you giving me more money? You have disrespected me. So this is why we're having a global perspective on tipping. A perspective is basically a point of view or a way of looking at things. So this is a global way of looking at tipping trends. Okay, so if we have a big story in the news, there could be a new war has broken out. We can look at it from a political perspective, from a military, from a war kind of perspective, from an economic perspective, from different ways of looking at a big story or a big event that can be considered and judged and evaluated in different ways. So tipping and their trends, and this is a global look or looking at it from a global perspective, not just here in Taiwan. So let's find out more about tipping, where it's done, how it's done, who does it, and whether people are big fans or really don't like it much. Tipping trends, a global perspective. Tipping, the act of giving extra money to service workers, is common in many parts of the world, while in others it is seen as totally unnecessary. Even in countries where tipping is expected, debates arise over the proper amounts. As with any complex topic, opinions differ based on cultural and personal factors. Here is what 8 people from different countries said when asked the question, "Do you tip?"
大家好，首先介绍标题中的单字 perspective。这个名词的意思是思考问题的角度、观点或是态度。例如 Amber's travels have influenced her perspective on different cultures and ways of life. Amber 的旅行影响了她对不同文化和生活方式的看法。或者 From my perspective, changing our strategy now would be unwise. 以我的观点看来，现在更换策略并不明智。接下来是动词 arise， 它指的是出现、发生或是产生。例如 Financial problems arose shortly after the company was founded. 在公司刚成立不久后，就出现了财务问题。或者 Questions arose when Brian got fired for no obvious reason. Brian 无缘无故被解雇，引发众人疑问。接着看到单字 differ， 这个动词指的是与点点点不同或是有区别。举例来说 The company I work for now differs from my old company in the amount of freedom given to employees. 我现在的公司和以前的公司在给予员工自由方面有所不同。又或者说 My little brother and I differ in so many ways that people don't even think we're related. 我和我弟弟在很多方面都有所不同，以至于人们甚至认为我们没有关联。
Okay, let's talk about the introductory paragraph in today's lesson. It says, tipping, the act of giving extra money to service workers, is common in many parts of the world, while in others it is seen as totally unnecessary, as is the case here in Taiwan, thank goodness. Okay, so here, tipping, again, we give you the definition. That's when you give a little extra money to servers, especially in restaurants, but it could be in hotels when somebody helps you with your luggage or something, or maybe if you're given a ride by a taxi driver, you need to give tips to those people as well. Yes, it is common in many parts of the world. In North America, as you said, and maybe some European countries. I think it's common in Mexico as well, maybe other Latin American countries. But in some countries, it is simply not done. It is totally unnecessary, as I said, here in Taiwan, but also in Japan and maybe other Asian countries as well.
That's very, very true. Although here in Taiwan, they often add 10 or 15% to your restaurant bill, which kind of acts as a tip, but you don't have to actually figure that out on your own. Whereas in other countries, you do, and the amount that you give can really depend on the relationship you have with that waiter. If you give a good tip, they will love to see you again. If you give them a bad tip, they might remember your face and not want to serve you next time. It says, even in countries where tipping is expected, debates arise over the proper amounts. Yeah, so in, for example, North America, where tipping is very common and is expected, you should give a tip. But still, debates, arguments, discussions arise or begin or come up over the proper amounts. When a problem arises, a debate arises, an issue arises, it appears, it comes up, it wasn't there before, something happened, the situation changed, and now we have a problem. Or with a debate, maybe you're out with your friends and you're just having a conversation and someone starts talking about whether shopping online is better than shopping in stores. And then people will start to have opinions about this and say, oh, I think online shopping is so wonderful because it's convenient. And other people say, well, shopping in stores provides more jobs for people. And this is a debate, and it came up naturally over a conversation at dinner. So debates do arise, do appear over the proper amounts. I mean, it used to be kind of 10 to 15%, 20% if it's really good. On my last trip back to North America, I'd learned that no, now it's more like 15 or 20% and 25% if you're really impressed with the service. So these things do change over time as well.
Yeah, even if you are given really bad service, I think the servers still expect a pretty large tip anyway, but that's the reason we have tips as a sort of way to let the server know that they provided acceptable or unacceptable service. If they provide really terrible service, yes, you can stiff them or simply not give them any tip. There's no law against that, but still you might come across some problems that way. If you don't leave a tip for somebody, they might meet you in the parking lot afterwards. So watch out for that. No, I'm just kidding, of course, but it still could cause some problems. And as with any complex topic, opinions differ based on cultural and personal factors. So this is a complex topic and the world is big. We've got lots of different countries out there. So opinions differ. To differ means they have different opinions or different ideas about something. You may have political opinions that differ. Maybe someone in your family supports the left and somebody else supports the right, and you have arguments. Yes, your opinions differ, your political viewpoints differ, or they are different.
All right, so here is what 8 people from different countries said when asked the question, do you tip? So we're going to talk to 8 different people from around the world, from 8 different countries. The question is, do you tip? And of course, they will be answering for their own country. I'm sure when many of these travel to other places, they will follow the local rules. But we're learning about the local rules in their countries. Do you tip? What's the tipping culture, in other words? So let's get into it with Maria from Italy and Javier from Mexico in the second part of our article.
Maria, Italy. If I'm at a cafe and the service is very good, I'll leave a small tip, maybe 10%. But usually in Italy, tipping is not expected. At some restaurants, they already add a service charge to the bill. I like it that way because then I don't have to calculate it myself.
Javier, Mexico. Oh yes, I definitely tip. For me and many others in Mexico, it's a way of showing respect for hard work. Also, some people, like the people who pack your bags in the grocery store, get no money from their employer. So if you neglect their tip, they don't get paid.
第二部分介绍动词 calculate， 意思是计算、估算或是估计。例如 The bank teller calculated the interest payments on Darren's new mortgage. 银行出纳员计算 Darren 的新贷款需支付的利息。或是 At the end of each month, Rex calculates how much money he's spent. 每个月月底 Rex 都会计算他花了多少钱。另外，去掉这个字的字尾 e， 改成 ion， 就会变成名词 calculation， 表示估算或是计算。例如 We did a calculation to see how much money we'd need for the work. 我们计算了一下这项工作需要多少钱。再举一个例子 The boss made a few calculations and decided that he couldn't afford to hire anyone else. 老板做了一些估算，决定他不能再聘雇任何人。接着是 neglect， 这个动词表示忽视、忽略或是疏于照管。可以说 I can tell you've been neglecting the plants because they look a little brown. 我可以看得出来你一直忽略那些植物，因为它们看起来有点呈枯褐色。也可以说 Tim regretted neglecting his family because he was too busy with work. Tim 后悔自己因为工作太忙而忽视了家人。
Okay, so we've got some opinions from different people from different countries around the world. We're going to start with Maria, who's from Italy, and she says, If I'm at a cafe and the service is very good, I'll leave a small tip, maybe 10%. Okay, so that's not as high as the tips that are expected in North America, as you said, 15, maybe even 20%, maybe even 25%, or maybe even 100%, who knows? But in any case, yes, she goes to a cafe, and if she thinks the service is very good, she'll think it would be very nice to leave the server a little bit of a tip, but it's only 10%, okay? And I'm sure in Italy they're not too particular about that. I'm sure the server would be very happy with just 10%, not like the spoiled servers in America who expect 20 or 25%.
Okay, but usually in Italy, tipping is not expected, Maria says. So that's why for her, it's a personal choice. If the service is good, she'll give a small amount, 10%, not a huge amount of money. But as she says, in general, and this is good news for tourists, tipping in Italy is not expected. So most people won't even notice if you don't leave a tip because they don't expect to leave a tip. And in some ways, it's like Taiwan. As she goes on, she explains that some restaurants, they already add a service charge to the bill. So there you go. At some of the restaurants, probably ones with sit-down service, with waiters, with busboys clearing your table, you know, at a nicer type of restaurant, not at like a fast food place. But at a nicer restaurant, they already add a service charge, 10, 15%, to the bill. So it's already factored in when you get that bill at the end of the meal. You pay the full fare or the full price, and you are already paying for that extra service charge. You don't have to figure it out. And Maria likes it that way because probably like many people, she finds the math of tipping kind of challenging once in a while.
Right, indeed. Nowadays, of course, we got our smartphones, and if you have a meal at a restaurant in a country where tipping is expected, you can open up the calculator app on your phone and enter in the amount of the meal and then calculate what the percentage is and then provide your tip accordingly. So yes, indeed, if you do some calculations, you will calculate some numbers, you will do some mathematics in order to come up with an answer or a solution to your problem. And yes, indeed, because in Italy, it's not expected to tip there, you don't have to worry about that stupid stuff. Whereas you do, if you're in the USA, you need to be sure you give the proper tip. Otherwise, someone's going to give you a really dirty look.
That's absolutely right. And even easier, I think they actually have tip apps. So you just type in the total price and press 20% and it'll figure it out for you if calculating it using a calculator is beyond your math skills, as it might be for myself, I have to admit. So there you go. Lots of easy ways to do it. But if you don't have to tip, that's great. You can skip all that calculating, skip all that math work. Let's go to Javier from Mexico. Let's see if they're similar in their tipping culture. as well. Oh, yes, Javier says, I definitely tip. For me and many others in Mexico, it's a way of showing respect for hard work. Interesting. So their tipping culture is more like North America, where tips are kind of expected, and they're kind of used as a reward, as a way of showing respect for hard work. If you do a really good job as a waiter in the restaurant, really tend to your customers very well, make them feel super comfortable, maybe show your personality a little bit by being very friendly with them, you can hope for a large tip because you're doing hard work, you're doing a good job. Also, some people, like the people who pack your bags in the grocery store, get no money from their employer. Oh my gosh, or maybe their pay is very low. So people who pack your bags in the grocery store, maybe the people who pump your gas at the gas station when you stop to fill up your car, that kind of person. It's a tough job. They don't get a lot of respect. They don't get a lot of pay or a big paycheck. They get no money from their employer. I don't think the people are working for free. I think the people are just working for a very low wage. So for Javier, he says, so if you neglect their tip, they don't get paid, or they go home with just a few dollars for a long, hard days of work. That is, if you neglect or ignore their tip. To neglect something is to ignore it, to not pay attention to it, to kind of let it pass by, to not do the things you should do to keep it in good condition. If you neglect your bicycle outside, it will start to rust. If you neglect your friends, they'll stop calling you. And if you neglect your waiter or neglect their tip, the next time you go back, they won't be happy to see you.
My goodness, even grocery store clerks are expecting tips these days. I can tell you, I used to work at a gas station when I was in high school, and nobody ever gave me a tip. I wonder if you have to give tips to people in gas stations nowadays. I know you don't have to here in Taiwan. You just have to say thank you and move on. Okay, let's move on now to the third part of our lesson. We've got another opinion from Yumi, who is from the land of the rising sun, Japan. Let's listen.
Yumi, Japan. Never. Tipping is a big faux pas in Japan. It's actually considered quite offensive. Here, employees take pride in doing their best without expecting extra money.
"第三部分看到形容词 offensive， 它的意思是冒犯的、得罪人的、无理的或是令人不快的。例如Commenting on someone else's appearance negatively is usually unhelpful and offensive. 以负面的方式评论别人的外表，通常没有帮助且令人反感。最后看到片语 take pride in 加名词或是加动词 ing， 指的是以点点点为荣，或是因点点点感到自豪。例如 Taking pride in your work will not only motivate you, it will also improve the quality of what you produce. 以自己的工作为傲，不仅会激励你，也将增进你工作产出的品质。再看一个例子 Nancy takes pride in donating a part of her paycheck to animal shelters every month. Nancy 很自豪自己每个月都会将一部分薪水捐给动物收容所。
Okay, so here's what Yumi has to say about tipping. She says, never. I never tip in answer to the question, do you tip? Never. I don't do it. Tipping is a big faux pas in Japan. This term is not pronounced faux pas. It looks like that, but this is from
French.
It's from French. Okay,
yeah.
Thank you very much. And yes, indeed, it's just when you don't do what's expected of you according to decorum or according to the manners of a certain country. So it's a big faux pas, for example, here in Taiwan, to wear your shoes when you enter someone's house. Okay, that is a big faux pas. You're supposed to take off those shoes. It is the cultural norm here in Taiwan. And of course, sometimes we commit faux pas or faux pas when we travel to other countries and we don't know their customs.
Yeah, it's just one of those social taboos or one of those things you shouldn't do. So it's not socially acceptable to tip in Japan. It's a big faux pas, as Yumi says. Yeah, it's actually considered quite offensive, she goes on to explain. That's very interesting. So not only is it something you don't do and people would look at you strangely and certainly they would not be expecting you to tip, you might actually insult the person you are trying to tip, to compliment, to give a little bonus to. They might find it offensive or rude or impolite to tip them. Why is that?
Yeah, why is that? Well, here she explains. Here in Japan, employees take pride in doing their best without expecting extra money. Okay, so that's the reason why it would be considered a faux pas to leave a tip at a restaurant in Japan. I just went there a couple of weeks ago, and yeah, they did not expect tips, and I didn't even worry about it because I had been living in Taiwan for so long and had never left a tip on the table here. And so I just assumed it was the same in Japan, as it was. But here she's saying the reason is employees or the servers who work there take pride in their work. Okay, so if you give them a tip, in a way, it's saying, well, you did not really do your job really well, so we need to compensate you by giving you a little extra money. The servers would find that offensive. They would be greatly insulted if you left a tip for them on the table.
Interesting. I don't quite see how you'd get insulted by that, but if it's a matter of face and self-respect, then fine. I'm quite happy to keep that extra money in my pocket. I don't want my waiter in Japan to be angry with me.
That brings us to the end of our explanation for today. Here comes Hanny.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。在课文第二部分，我们看到 A 选项 Maria 的回答有提到 If I'm at a cafe and the service is very good, I'll leave a small tip, maybe 10%. 如果我在一间咖啡馆而服务很好的话，我会留下一点小费，也许是10%。那这边要介绍的是 if 引导条件句的用法。if 引导表示条件的副词子句时，可以用来描述现在或未来可能发生的情况。那句型是 if 主词加动词，逗号，主词加上 will, can 或是 may 再加原形动词，那就可以表达如果怎么样怎么样，什么什么将会啊，可以可能怎么样。那 if 子句也可以摆在主要子句的后方。要特别注意的是 if 子句的动词我们要用现在简单式，而不是用未来式哦。举例来说 If it doesn't rain tonight, we will have a barbecue in the yard. 如果今晚没下雨，我们将会在院子里烤肉。好，那在这样的句型当中，主要子句也可以用祈使句表达，那么句型就会是 if 主词加动词，逗号，祈使句。举例来说 If you feel sleepy, go take a nap. 如果你觉得困，就去小睡一下吧。接着看到 B 选项 Javier 的回答有一个单字 neglect。那这个动词它表示忽视、忽略或疏于照管，我们来学它的字根。好 neg 这个字根表示否定， lect 表示选择。那当我们面前有了 A、B 这两样东西，选了 A 不选 B， 那没有被选到的 B 就表示它被忽视、忽略了嘛。用这个方法也许可以联想到 neglect 它有忽略、忽视或疏忽的意思。顺便补充几个有相同字根的单字。第一个补充的是 negate, negate。那它的字根 neg 表示否定， ate 是动词字尾。那这个单字就表示否定，使什么无效。如果在后面加上形容词字尾 ive 变成 negative， 那就表示否定的、负面的或消极的。第二个补充的是 negligible， 它的字根 neg 表示否定， lig 表示选择。那么字尾的 ible 表示可怎么样的，那可以不选择，连选都不用选就直接把它否定掉，用这样的方式应该可以联想到 negligible 表示可忽略的、微不足道的。好，第三个补充的是 negotiate， 它的字根 neg 表示否定， OTI 是休闲，那么 ATE 是动词字尾。那从字根来看，这个字面意思是说没有休闲活动，不是来玩的嘛。其实 negotiate 这个字原本的意思就是指做生意，做生意当然不是来玩的咯。那后来 negotiate 它才衍生出谈判协商的意思。好，那以上是今天重点整理，我们来回顾今天单词吧。
Perspective.Will's perspective on success changed significantly after the failure of his business. Arise. We didn't expect so many difficulties to arise as we prepared for the performance. Differ. Although Laura and Kim are twins, their personalities differ considerably. Calculate. Mark quickly calculated the sum of the expenses for the trip to ensure that he stayed within his budget. Neglect. Parents shouldn't neglect their children's emotional needs, as meeting these needs is fundamental to their growth and development. Offensive. Though Ira was trying to be funny, Evelyn found his joke offensive.
Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of our program, and please make sure you join us again next time. From all of us here, I am Mike.
I am Roger. See you next time.